Okay then, this is me playing a little bit of Galaxy Run, Space Run Galaxy, which is the sequel to Space Run. Um, but I'm not here to talk about that right now. Instead, I'm going to talk about 5 bullshit myths that you hear in the gaming community that have been repeated so much that people have begun to take them as gospel. So without much ado, let's get into busting the first one, which is, um, well, you'll see after the cut. So here we go with the next little bit of exposition. Um, you'll hear a lot of people say that, well, not a lot of people, but quite a few people in the game sphere. Well, the reason that the PlayStation came about is because Nintendo fucked over Sony. This is one of those things where the truth is stranger than fact. So, without much ado, let's talk about the truth versus, the facts. While it is true that Nintendo and Sony did enter into a business deal, it wasn't what you might think. Basically, Nintendo essentially said, "Okay, we're, we want to create a system that uses discs, a disc-based medium. We have no experience with a disc-based medium, so, we'll go with Sony that at this point was was huge with CD players and shit like that." And so they went with it. But here's the thing. Sony had the technical know-how to build the system, but Nintendo was going to use their IPs. Here's the problem. Sony said that because you're going to be using our medium, we get, I believe it was 60 to 70% of the profits off of the software sold using CD technology. Now, two things about this. Nintendo shouldn't have been surprised because, let's keep it real, that's how Sony became a juggernaut, is that they controlled the technology behind the medium. That's how they did it. Sony wasn't going with they controlled the software, right? So the real money for Sony wasn't in the hardware. It wasn't selling you a CD player. Those were basically sold at a modest profit. It was selling you a fucking the CDs, which they controlled the factors of, and that's how they made their money. Same thing before that, it was cassettes. Before that, it was 8 tracks and records. That's how they made their money. Now, unfortunately, Nintendo wasn't going to be a bitch like that, so they backed out of the deal. But here's the irony of the situation. The system that they were going to make was going to be called the Nintendo Sony PlayStation. Sony, because they have no original ideas of their own, basically said, "You know what, guys? We got a good name here. We're going to use it," and the rest was born. But that wasn't enough. No, it goes deeper than that, which the next bullshit myth we'll bust will cover that topic. So this one's a doozy. the reason Nintendo lost third-party support during the fifth gen from from what they had during the fourth and third gen is because they the reason why that happened is because they used cartridges, and cartridges were making certain games impossible or very difficult. That's bullshit. Plain and simple. The reason Nintendo lost third-party support had nothing to do with the medium, because at the end of the day, data is data. As long as the data that you have is big enough, then it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter what the storage medium is. As long as it's big enough to hold what it needs to hold, it doesn't matter. It's the reason why if you put a game on a flash drive, if the flash drive is big enough, it doesn't really matter. It could be on a CD, it could be on a 64 gig SD card. It doesn't matter as long as the hardware is strong enough. Then that's all it is. As long as the storage medium is big enough to hold the data, that's all that really matters. And this, and how you optimize the code and everything. Now we saw this with, when it came out that a lot of the multiplats during the 5th gen were, in fact, better on the N64 than on the PlayStation or the Sega Saturn. Amazing. For example, Gauntlet Legends looked like shit on the PlayStation 1, looked okay on the Saturn, but looked the best on the N64. Capcom said that it would be impossible for Resident Evil 2 to be on the N64, but with a little bit of code optimization and some compression of some files, ran pretty well on the N64. So that pretty much proves that saying that it couldn't be done was just some bullshit to make the PlayStation look good at the time. Speaking of making the PlayStation look good at the time, we'll get into why the RPGs left the N64 during the 5th gen, and you only had 4 RPGs appear on that system after the cut. So, this is another big one. People will say, well, the reason certain RPGs didn't appear on the N64 was because, and ultimately, RPGs left the Nintendo system is because, well, they lost. It was the cartridges. They were too big to be on a cartridge. That has nothing to do with it, because let's keep it real. The N64, basically, you had Ogre Battle. Ogre Battle was a fucking huge game. Hybrid Heaven was decent sized. There were some very graphically impressive games on that system that were large. For example, Rogue Squadron, and size was never an issue then. So with that being said, what's the real reason as to why RPGs left that system? Well, it might surprise you, or probably not if you're a smart person. Basically, what happened was this: Sony essentially bought a 10% share in Square Enix, and they basically gave Square Enix a ton of fucking money for advertisement for their new RPG. Final Fantasy VII. The reason why you haven't seen Final Fantasy reach the sales numbers of Final Fantasy VII is because Final Fantasy VII had a $1 million development budget, but it also had $100 million development budget, and it also had a $100 million advertisement budget, footed by Sony. Okay? Now, that's a lot of fucking money. That's basically, you couldn't go anywhere, and it was fucking inundated with fucking Final Fantasy VII. Shitty commercials, everything. Now, here's the thing. Originally, believe it or not, that game was supposed to be on the N64. Ironically, or maybe not so ironically, but after Sony bought the shares and everything, it kind of left the system. But it gets, here's where the dirty dealings come in, because there's nothing really wrong with that. The dirty dealings come in with this, where basically Sony said, well, you know, we can't have RPGs going out anyplace else. Now Suzuki, the president of Squaresoft, basically went to Enix and other RPG development houses and basically said, you know, have them move their projects from Nintendo systems to Sony systems, which is why the PlayStation became the RPG system. Had nothing to do with specs or anything like that. So, but you know what they say, dirty deeds don't go unpunished. And Enix and Square kind of fucked now, but you know, at the time they were riding high. Shortly after that, you know, within the next 5 years, Squaresoft kind of started going downhill. They were forced to merge with Enix, and they never really got their mojo back. Not really. I know people like to say they have, but they haven't. And hilariously, I mean, it's funny to me, because, you know, I never really thought that highly of them anyway, but, yeah. And the links will be in the description of each of these segments. So, with that being said, and the dirty dealing that was done by Square Enix, and why I don't really feel sorry for them at all when it comes to their money woes, if you will. Let's move on to the next myth. This is a big one. This one is the Nintendo's anti-consumer practices drove third parties away. They're forcing third parties to basically only produce so many titles per year, and you had to use their cartridges and had to get licensed by them. Here's the hilarious thing. Every fucking company, every video game company worth their salt has always had licensing with their products. Even when Atari was in, Atari had to go after third-party sellers who did shady shit because it was kind of hurting their bottom line. But no one ever talks about that because, you know, whatever. And as a matter of fact, because of those practices, Nintendo strengthened the video game market to where it could flourish because of things they did back then. For example, you know, you had to be a licensed developer, which meant you had to buy their dev kits, which meant you had to use their products. Now, part of this was also them getting paid, but I mean, they're a business. They're in business to make money, not to make you feel good. That being said, people got certain developers got salty, and you had pirate developers. For example, Atari with Tengen, which was you know, released unsanctioned carts. Which was theft, because I mean, let's keep it real. You're stealing from people when you do that, but whatever. Um, but yeah, people always forget that and tend to think that it was just whatever. But anyway, I digress. Nintendo stopped their policies with you had to use their cartridges, and you had to be licensed from us in 91. So yeah, that's kind of amazing. But people will still spout that bullshit because it helps their narrative, which is sad. But what are you gonna do? So, our next topic, and probably last, will come up next. So here we go with the final myth that needs to be busted, which, we've all heard it before. Nintendo is irrelevant, Nintendo is behind the times, Nintendo is this, Nintendo is that. Look, listen, okay? I'm a Nintendo fan. Readily admit that. But I don't disregard the accomplishments of the other console manufacturers. Atari helped a lot of the third parties a few of the third parties that still exist started under Atari and the ColecoVision and the Intellivision and stuff like that. And a lot of the third-party companies that I've come to know and love started on PC. So I'm not going to sit there and denigrate those companies. I might lament that they aren't as imaginative or creative or take as many creative risks as they did back in the day, but I'm not going to denigrate them. I'm not going to say, well, Sony became the first. Sony became one of the first quote-unquote modern casual consoles. Nothing wrong with that. Microsoft brought a lot of PC-like features to consoles, which I guess is a good thing. It could be a good thing, but I digress. But with all that being said, you cannot deny, and a lot of people will try, but it's a moot point. The reason the modern video game industry as we know it began in 1983, and not because Atari or Microsoft or Sony had anything to do with it. It was because this little shitty little company started making games and systems. Nintendo started making games and systems. It began with the Game & Watch. Then it became arcade games. Then it became a home system. Then a handheld. And from then on, that spiraled into a gaming empire. A company that has a little over 5,000 employees can fucking punch above their weight. And that's amazing. So, with all that being said, a lot of the things that we take for granted in gaming would not exist without Nintendo. There's many videos that have been put up from other people in the YouTube gamosphere. Nintendo's innovations becomes industry standard, stuff like that. And I know some people might get upset, but fuck them. They're right. You like your 6-axis, your Xbox controller. Congratulations, you like a highly modified SNES controller, which itself was a evolution of the NES dog bone controller. So basically, a lot of the people who are so vehemently anti-Nintendo have basically been playing have basically been playing Nintendo-like consoles. For Nintendo has been using Nintendo-like controls for 10 years. In the case of the PlayStation, 20. So, congratulations. The company you hate is the sole reason you fucking play the games the way you like to play them. But, whatever. So, with that being said, good day. Okay then, so here's the conclusion and summary. The conclusion is this. There's a lot of bad information floating around in the gaming community in regards to gaming in general, Nintendo specifically, and it's been repeated so much that people take it as gospel. It's fact. And you know what they say, if you repeat a lie often enough, people begin to accept it as truth, which is bullshit, but what are you going to do? So with that being said, it's time to dispel some of those myths. So, that's the summary. Nothing else coming out this week except Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'll be doing a BS Busters talking about when people get caught out. As far as this video is concerned, the link to all of my information will be kept will be in the description field. So if you doubt what I had to say, you can look at my sources and judge them for yourself. So with that being said, good day.